Sonic the Hedgehog has finally come to Magic the Gathering, and the Blue Blur has many people excited to build and brew and play with one of their favorite childhood characters. Whether you played the games growing up like me, or were a touch more enfranchised, having created your own Sonic OC, or becoming deeply involved in the Sonic community, there's no denying that Sonic has had a huge influence over many people throughout their childhood and even into adulthood. Rai, a close friend and one such Sonic fan, petitioned me to put together a Sonic deck with a budget of $500, not including the Sonic Secret Lair. Up to the challenge and ready to help a friend out, I couldn't turn him down, and so this video is a breakdown of the Sonic deck from one fan to another. This deck is a bit more token focused than some of the other lists that I've seen floating around, as there are some very solid spells that can make a ton of hasty creatures. The deck leans heavily into a haste and flash theme, but to make the deck function with the entire Sonic cast, a few vehicles were also thrown into the mix. This deck was requested to fit between bracket 3 and bracket 4, but beyond that, I tried to make a deck that I could reference Sonic things in as many times as possible. So let me know down below if you caught the subtler references. I also talk about a few cards that I considered adding at the end of the video, but you can see them all in the timestamps listed below. First, to understand the deck, let's go over the Sonic character cards and set a base for what to expect with the rest of it. Starting with our main man, Sonic the Hedgehog is a 2/4 Hedgehog warrior creature with haste and 2 additional abilities. Gotta Go Fast triggers when Sonic attacks, adding a +1/+1 counter to each creature you control with flash or haste. His second ability generates a tapped treasure token whenever he or another creature with haste or flash takes damage. Notably, this ability doesn't say whenever one or more creatures, so if your entire board were to take damage for any reason, you would create a treasure for each creature with flash or haste that was dealt damage this way, instead of only creating one single treasure. The majority of this deck is built around these abilities, but that's getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Knuckles, the Echidna, costs 2 red and is a 2/4 Echidna warrior with double strike, trample, and haste. He also has 2 other abilities. The first states whenever one or more other creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. The last states at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 30 or more artifacts, you win the game. Knuckles provides a way to generate treasures if your opponents aren't keen on blocking. One more important distinction is that this ability is worded the same way that existing cards like Professional Facebreaker are. If you swing 3 creatures at 3 different players and they all connect, you'll make 3 treasure tokens. So Knuckles can generate a lot of treasures each turn, and suddenly, 30 becomes a very reasonable number between Sonic and him. Amy Rose is the other creature from the drop that works fairly well in the deck. Costing 2 white and red, Amy is a 3/3 Hedgehog warrior with haste, and whenever Amy attacks, attach up to 1 target equipment to her. Then, up to 1 other target attacking creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is Amy's power. While Amy isn't a complete fit for what the deck is trying to do, she will always give another attacking creature an additional 3 power minimum, 4 when attacking with Sonic. And that alone works fairly well with Knuckles, or incentivizes your opponents to chump block with some of their smaller creatures, which then in turn generates more treasures. To round out Team Sonic, Miles Tails Prower is a 3/1 Fox Artificer that costs 1 white and blue. He has flash, flying, and whenever a vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if it has flying. Otherwise, put a flying counter on it. Tails does work with Sonic directly by being buffed whenever Sonic attacks, but the theme of vehicles is a little bit harder to integrate easily into the brew. I'll go over them later in the video, but I managed to slip a few vehicles into the deck that work well with both Sonic and Tails. Finally, Super State is a card that isn't easily referenced anywhere else in the video, so it'll go here. This 7-drop Legendary Aura gives your enchanted creature base power 9/9, flying, first strike, trample, and haste. If that wasn't enough, whenever enchanted creature deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage to each other opponent as well. It's worth noting that this damage dealt to other opponents isn't combat damage, meaning that it also isn't commander damage. It won't draw cards from effects that care about combat damage, and it won't generate treasures from Knuckles, etc, etc. Okay, stop. Tinfoil hat time. How many Chaos Emeralds are there? 7. You know who else cares about Super State? You know what else there are 7 of? That's right, Dragon Balls. Goku, who has over 9,000 power. Super State makes a creature base power 9/9. Now I get it. You can tell me, oh, it's base power 9/9 simply because the coin counter's maxed out when Sonic turns into Super Sonic. Sure, but then why didn't they just make a Super Sonic card? Sure, Super Sonic, Super Knuckles, Super Silver, Super Shadow, they all exist, but mark my words. It's foreshadowing. Goku's on the horizon. DBZ is coming. Super State deals damage to each opponent because of instant transmission, Goku is coming, the Saiyans are coming, the Saiyans are coming. Now, Rai wanted an aggro Sonic deck, and one of the most aggressive options I can think of is token generation and a token strategy. Especially because Rai already has a Cranko deck, tokens are very familiar to him. Therefore, the main game plan is centered around getting out a ton of hasty creatures that get bigger when Sonic swings, and 4 key cards will help with this strategy. Assemble the Legion is probably the weakest out of these. A 5-cost enchantment that creates a 1/1 on your next turn, then 2 1/1s the turn after, then 3, then 4, etc, etc. If a game goes particularly long, or a few board wipe happen while this stick around, you can quickly amass a board to recover. Eiganjo Uprising is a little more risky. For a red, white, and X, you create X 2/2 samurai tokens with vigilance and haste. The downside is that each opponent also creates X -1 tokens as well. However, if you swing with Sonic, all of your samurais become 3/3s, meaning your opponents can't trade their tokens with yours as easily if they all want to hit you. Fourth, Aerolingus is a well-known powerhouse of a card. Similar to Eiganjo Uprising, you create X 2/2 creatures, but with 3 major differences. These creatures have haste and trample instead of haste and vigilance. Only you create these creatures, and if you deal combat damage to an opponent this turn, you become the Monarch. Furthermore, the trample on these tokens is very useful in getting in damage once you've swung a couple times with Sonic. Finally, in my opinion, the best and cheapest card in this category, Tempt with Vengeance costs a single red and X. You create X 1/1 elementals with haste. Then, each opponent can also choose to create X 1/1 elementals with haste. For each opponent that opts to create those tokens, you will create that many tokens again. This card can create up to 4 times the amount of tokens that the other cards can, and with some simple politicking, this might be very easy actually. For example, if while casting the spell, you promise the last player in turn order that you will never attack them with the additional tokens that they give you if they choose to make tokens, it might pressure other players into creating the tokens as well. Or, if push comes to shove, you could make this deal with every player at the table, although be very specific about the words you choose. If you make the tokens too, I'll never attack you with those 5 tokens that you get from me. If each player made 5 tokens, you have 15 tokens that can't attack someone, but those sets of 5 tokens can still attack the other players who didn't give you the tokens. Everyone making the tokens is ideal because you want to make as many tokens as possible, and when you swing with Sonic later, once again, you can block all of their tokens they made for free. Beyond token generators though, there are a number of cards in the deck that also have flash and or haste. In fact, very few creatures in the deck don't have or can't gain flash or haste. Touching on cards with haste, Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, can generate mana and take cards from your opponent's library. Furthermore, if you dash him in, he gets haste, and is a card that is likely to be blocked in order to get rid of him, netting you a treasure either way with Sonic out. Gingerbrute, on the other hand, is the inverse, a creature that is super evasive and will get larger and larger while remaining nigh unblockable if you pay its 1 mana ability. And rounding out our trio of annoying cards to deal with, Slicer Hired Muscle is a menace that attacks every single combat, since you give him to your opponents on their turn, and he gets another counter whenever you attack with Sonic. Goldspan Dragon is a flying hasty 4/4 for 3 red that gives you a treasure whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell. More importantly though, this dragon allows all of your treasures to sacrifice for 2 mana instead of just 1. Go-Go Mysterious Mime is a new addition to Magic and a very solid card. At the beginning of combat on your turn, Go-Go can become a copy of another creature you control, except its name remains Go-Go, and both creatures get +2/+0 and haste until end of turn. Because its name doesn't change, Go-Go can even become a copy of Sonic or any of your other legendary creatures. Since it doesn't have the same name as the legend, they won't sacrifice to the legend rule. This would let you double up on your attack triggers and treasure tokens that you generate during this turn. Rounding out our list of creatures that fulfill no direct additional role, High Fade Trickster is a 4-drop, 4/2 with flash, flying, and you can cast spells as though they had flash. While a decent portion of your spells have flash, not everything does. Being able to flash in Knuckles right before your turn, or before you connect to generate a few more treasures is a perfect example. There are a few more creatures that we haven't covered yet, but we'll see them in the other sections that we get to. Right now, let's jump into our ramp and card selection. There are 8 cards that I consider ramp in the deck. From the Sonic drop, we have Soul Ring, the Format All-Star, as well as Knuckles Gloves, which is a skin of Reaver flavor. Aside from those, we have Arcane Signet, Replicating Ring, and Ring of Barahir, which, yes, you could get cheaper if you use the Sword of the Animist, but that's a sword, not a ring. Moving on from ring themes, we have Commander Sphere, Wayfarer's Bubble, and finally the Regalia. The Regalia is unassuming at first, but actually it fits perfectly into the theme of our deck. It can be crewed by any of our 1/1 tokens that we generate, it has haste, it automatically finds us a land into play directly, and it can get flying if we have tails out. There are 11 cards in the deck that I consider card selection or card draw. I consider a card selection if it allows you to manipulate the cards in your hand or in your library. Fabricate, Open the Armory, and Gamble all allow you to look for a specific card to put into your hand. Tornado, Sonic's biplane, is also card selection, as it can grab a historic card from the top 5 cards in your deck when it deals damage to a player. Over a quarter of the deck is historic, so there's a fairly good chance that you get a card whenever you attack and connect with it. Professional Facebreaker, as mentioned, allows you to generate additional treasures when you hit players, but it also lets you sacrifice excess treasures in order to impulse draw. Unexpected Windfall gives you 2 cards and 2 treasures at instant speed by discarding a single card. Meanwhile, Totally Expected Windfall wheels every player, drawing cards equal to the highest number of cards a player discarded this way. Bident of Thassa and Enduring Curiosity both give you cards whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player. Bident of Thassa has the additional use of forcing an opponent to attack out, opening them up to you on your turn. Enduring Curiosity, meanwhile, has Flash, meaning that it both benefits from Sonic attacking, or it can be cast in response to no blockers being declared, and it also comes back as an enchantment if it dies as a creature. Next up on the list we have Buster Sword. While not initially on my list due to budget reasons and an initial lack of relevance, I was informed that it is in fact a Sonic reference, and those who know will get it. But on top of that, this curves nicely with Sonic. You can cast him on turn 4, and then on turn 5 you can cast and equip the Buster Sword to Sonic. Finally, the One Ring is infamous for its value as a card draw spell and a protection spell. This 4-drop Indestructible Artifact gives you protection from everything for a turn when it enters if you cast it. Then you can tap it and put a counter on it and draw cards equal to the number of counters on it. An insane amount of value for the trade-off of taking damage equal to the number of counters on it on each of your turns. The One Ring is a great source of protection, but let's talk about our other pieces of protection as well. The protection in this deck is fairly niche, as much of it is designed to synergize with Sonic. Pico Pico Hammer attaches both it and any future equipment on entering, and gives that creature that is equipped to +2/+0 and indestructible. Power Sneakers give the equipped creature haste and shroud. Reconnaissance costs a single white and allows you to remove an attacking creature from combat for completely free. This lets you swing Sonic or any other creature for free with no fear of repercussions from being blocked and killed. Beyond that, you can also give a creature pseudo-vigilance with this, because you can activate this at the end of combat, after it's dealt combat damage to something. It's really strange and not something that you would immediately intuit if it wasn't listed on the text. Selfless Squire is a 4-drop 1/1 with Flash that is essentially just a fog. When it enters, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn, and when damage is prevented this way, you'll put that many counters on the Squire. This also has a special use, but we'll talk about that later. To round out our protection category, we have 3 indestructible spells. Flawless Maneuver can be free cast if you control your commander, and simply grants creatures you control indestructible for the turn. Boros Charm is a modal spell. You can choose to give all permanents you control indestructible, give a creature double strike until end of turn, or deal 4 damage to a player or planeswalker. Finally, Archangel Athelstan can be flashed in, and is a 4/4 with flying and vigilance. When she enters, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Afterwards, if a non-angel dies under your control, she'll flip out, literally. At the beginning of the next upkeep, Athelstan will transform into Athelstan the Purifier. Now a 6/5 flying angel, she will deal 3 damage to each other creature and opponent when she transforms. This is great for when you want to protect your creatures for a single turn, and can even generate treasures if she flips and pings all your hasty creatures. But it also means that only one creature has to die in the future turn in order for her to transform and hit everything for free. So Athelstan is definitely one of the riskier protection spells. We've covered our protection, which technically classifies as interaction, but we also have to talk about a few other cards in the interaction section that don't explicitly save our things, starting with our Boardwipes. When it comes to Boardwipes in Magic, I've gradually shifted away from what I've dubbed complete resets, and will prefer often more times a one-sided Boardwipe. A one-sided Boardwipe is exactly what it sounds like. This form of removal oftentimes leaves you with your key pieces in play while disrupting other players' board states. This can be due to the fact that it simply doesn't remove your things, or because it allows you to choose which gets removed. A great example of this is Farewell, although many players hate it, and even more players probably misuse it. It doesn't fit perfectly into our deck, as it doesn't give us quite as much flexibility as the card I opted to use in place of it, Austere Command. This 6-drop Boardwipe lets you get rid of two of the most problematic things from the options of artifacts, enchantments, creatures with mana value 3 or less, or creatures with mana value 4 or greater. If we've already generated a ton of tokens and we want to swing in for victory, we can choose to keep all of our little goons while sacrificing Sonic. Or if we haven't made a bunch of tokens and we have Sonic out, we can choose to get rid of all of the little creatures in play, and artifacts or enchantments maybe. If we'd prefer to keep Sonic around as well as our little creatures, Damning Verdict and Wave Goodbye remove all creatures without counters on them from play, with Wave Goodbye simply returning anything without a +1/+1 counter on it to its owner's hand, and Damning Verdict destroying every creature without any kind of counter on it. And then we have a panic button. If the board is beyond what you can handle and you just need to wipe it all away, Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to everything. While this removes your creatures, if you have Sonic in play, you can generate a few additional treasures as a consolation prize. Ideally, you won't have to use Blasphemous Act though, and instead you'll have more pointed and focused removal. That single target removal is what the rest of our interaction section is. Generous Gift is a blanket removal spell, letting you blow up any permanent in exchange for its controller making a 3/3 elephant. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares also are general removal pieces that typically can remove a creature for the rest of the game. Aven Interrupter can stop a spell for a single turn. When you flash in this 2/2 flyer, it exiles a spell on the stack, which then becomes plotted. This means that later on, its controller can cast it for free on a later turn, but only at sorcery speed. This is particularly useful for counterspells since they can never be cast again. Beyond that though, this bird also taxes all spells cast from graveyards and from exile. Aven Mind Sensor can be flashed into limited opponents to search for an answer, only allowing them to tutor 4 cards deep whenever they search their library. Brazen Borrower can bounce a non-land permanent to an opponent's hand, and later can be flashed in from its adventure. Inventor, Shaper Savant, can be flashed in to either return a spell on the stack, or any permanent in play to its owner's hand. Fierce Guardianship is our third game changer in the deck, bringing us up to the very edge of what is considered bracket 3. But it fits. I don't know if I could come up with a more fitting protection spell for Sonic, given his character. Finally, while not really interaction most of the time, Imposter Mech is another spicy vehicle, letting you copy the best creature on an opponent's field, turning it into a vehicle with crew 3. Furthermore, if you had Tails out, it becomes a copy of the best creature in play that also flies. So tell me again, who's the faker? The mech doesn't intrinsically have flash or haste, but oftentimes whatever you copy will be worth the slot in the deck. There are a few other cards that could be considered interaction, but for the purpose of our deck, they are not, and we need to talk about them and a couple other key cards in the section simply dubbed Sonic Synergies. Full Throttle is the most straightforward of our synergies. It gives you 2 additional combats and untaps the creatures that attacked this turn at the beginning of each combat. Pairing this with Sonic, a lot of damage can be dealt completely out of nowhere, especially if you get a lot of tokens in play. Speaking of tokens, if our opponents won't give us treasures, we'll just have to do it ourselves. Caltrips is a 3-mana artifact that deals 1 damage to a creature whenever it attacks. If you created a bunch of 1/1 tokens, you can even order the Caltrips trigger to resolve after the Sonic trigger does, letting you attack with a bunch of 1/1s that become 2/2s before they would take the damage, meaning they'll survive. This will generate you tapped treasures equal to the amount of attacked creatures with flash or haste. Similarly, Fire Magic costs a single red and can deal 1 damage to each creature at instant speed. Furthermore, if you need a little bit more damage, you can pay 3 total mana to deal 2 damage to everything, or 6 total mana to deal 3 to everything. The last card in our Keep Hitting Ourselves repertoire is Fiery Confluence. This 4-mana sorcery allows us to pick 3, and we can choose the same mode more than once. We can deal 1 damage to each creature, we can deal 2 damage to each opponent, or we can destroy target artifact. If you choose the first option multiple times, each of these count as independent instances of damage, meaning that you will trigger Sonic 1, 2, or 3 times depending on how many times you chose the damage dealing effect. This would let us generate an absurd amount of treasures instantaneously, especially if we have a few 1/1s in play. This is because the 1/1s won't die until state-based actions are checked, which is only after a spell has fully resolved, meaning that a 1/1 will take 1 damage 3 times before it actually dies, which means it will trigger Sonic 3 times. Finally, and unassuming at first glance, Amulet of Vigor allows us to untap a permanent that enters tapped under our control. Aside from a few lands, that doesn't actually matter for any card in our deck. What we want it for is our treasure tokens, and paired with a few cards, this ends up being the linchpin in our deck for one of the ways that we can win the game. So let's talk about that, and our other ways that we can win the game as well. The most intensive combo in the deck that we've been building up to this whole time is Pyrohemia? Follow me for a moment if you will. This 4-mana enchantment allows you to pay a single red mana and deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. This includes you, but more importantly, it also includes your creatures with flash or haste. Now, normally, this could generate you a few treasures and you call it. If you have a bunch of 2/2 tokens, you can activate Pyrohemia once a turn, keeping your board alive while making a bunch of mana. However, you can probably see the 4-card combo that's been simmering on low this entire time, and I'm ready to turn up the heat and show you what I've cooked. If you have Sonic, Amulet of Vigor, any of your indestructible spells, and Pyrohemia out, you can activate Pyrohemia as many times as you have life. Let's say you cast Flawless Maneuver on this board state. Sonic is now indestructible. If you sacrifice a treasure to activate Pyrohemia, you will deal 1 damage to each player in Sonic, which creates a tapped treasure in turn. In turn, this treasure untaps thanks to Amulet of Vigor, leaving you in the same state as before, except each player is 1 life lower. You can repeat this until you win, if you have the highest life total, or until the board is clear enough for you to swing through if you don't. Even without Amulet of Vigor, this combo allows you to generate a ton of mana for your next turn. Remember that Selfless Squire I mentioned a while back? If you can also manage to cast this, for example by having multiple creatures with flash or haste in play after activating Pyrohemia a few times, then you can now prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn from any source as well. At this point, it no longer matters if Selfless Squire lives, because you simply can activate Pyrohemia infinite times. But if you cast Selfless Squire and then attack with Sonic, you can also make an infinitely large Selfless Squire if someone lived thanks to the One Ring or something like that. This is because Selfless Squire will be a 2/2, and while it won't prevent the damage dealt to it, you can activate Pyrohemia, deal 1 to everything including it. You'll generate a treasure from it taking a damage, but you've prevented the damage being dealt to you, which means Selfless Squire will get 1 bigger. This means it will always be 1 toughness away from lethal, but will get infinitely large. Herald of Secret Streams is a much more traditional finisher. All of your creatures with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked, meaning you just swing through for victory. This is especially true with Uncivil Unrest, a 5-mana enchantment that gives non-token creatures you control Riot. This means they enter with either haste or a +1/+1 counter on them. Beyond that, it also doubles all damage a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it would deal to a permanent or player. Weftstalker Ardent is a new addition from Edge of Eternities. This 3-drop pings each opponent whenever another creature or artifact enters, which is everything that we are trying to do. Beyond that, you can temporarily play it for a single red mana by warping it in if you need the 2 mana to cast something else. Warping a card exiles it at the end of turn, but you can still cast it on a later turn from exile. To round out our finishers, Thundering Raiju is a 4-drop spirit from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This 3/3 powerhouse with haste says whenever it attacks, put a counter on a target creature you control. Then, Thundering Raiju deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. A modified creature is anything with an equipment, aura, or counter on it. If you can slam this down the turn on or after you cast a beefy X spell to generate a ton of tokens, this can end the game out of nowhere, because just like before, you can resolve this trigger after Sonic's trigger puts a counter on each creature with haste. And we've discussed the entire deck. The only other thing is the Manabase, which is shown on screen right now. I specifically included all 3 fast lands because, come on man, you gotta go fast. At the time of writing this script, the total cost of the deck is $487.58, which gives us a little bit of wiggle room if we wanted to add a couple more cards and bump it over the edge into bracket 4 territory. Editing me here, as I had almost completely edited and clipped everything, the deck is now over $500. So, to keep in line with the spirit of the deck video, I'm going to say we're going to cut Ragavan. It's nearly a $30 card, and it dies to a lot of the things that we are trying to do if we cast it for its regular cost instead of its dash cost, as it's a 2/1 that dies to our fire magic, our caltrips, etc, etc. Beyond that, if we dash it in, that is more mana on a future turn that we will have to do to cast Ragavan again, and if we ever cast him again for just its regular cost, it won't have haste, and therefore won't play into our Sonic plan very well at all. As for the cut I opted for in place of Ragavan, Frostcliff Siege is very good in our deck. No matter which mode you choose, it does a lot for us. We can either draw up to 3 cards, depending on how many players we can connect with, or it gives our entire board +1/+0, trample, and haste, which works incredibly well with Sonic. Originally, this wasn't in my considerations for the list, but Ragavan's expensive, Ragavan doesn't actually work that well with the deck, and on top of all of this, I found myself wanting more cards in hand when I was playtesting with the deck. With our deck back below $500 again, let's talk about more adds that I had in consideration for the deck. There were 9 cards I considered adding to the deck, which were cut for various reasons, but definitely could be included if a card or two in the video didn't strike your fancy. First off, let's talk about one card that made this deck into bracket 4. Aggravated Assault is a 3-mana enchantment that gives you repeatable extra combat for the absurd cost of just 5 mana. This pairs well with Reaver Cleaver, which can give you infinite combats in the mid to early game if left uninteracted with. I had to keep the deck at 3, and Knuckles Gloves had to stay in, so Aggro Assault got the axe. Next up, there were a few vehicles that were tempting to add as well. Bessie, the Doctor's Roadster, is a 2-drop hasty vehicle that makes another legend unblockable when you attack with it. This is good for getting attacks through with Sonic, but with a cost of Crew 2 and offering no value aside from free attacks with Sonic, Bessie got sidelined. Deluxe Dragster is a tad more interesting. This 5-drop 4/3 can't be blocked except by vehicles. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can cast an instant or sorcery from their graveyard for free and exile the spell as it resolves. Yet another card that slipped under my radar in this era of sets releasing insanely close to each other, this vehicle definitely turned my head when I read it. The lack of flash or haste ultimately meant this vehicle took a pit stop in my Maybe board and has been sitting there since. Alexios, Demos of Cosmos, is almost identical to Slicer. They both get passed off to the other players in the game and are forced to attack another player every turn. Slicer is harder to kill because of having double strike, and would get a counter the turn you played him with Sonic, but Rysati ultimately prefers Demos, whose trample lets more damage get through a board state easier. Reckless Fireweaver was one of the last cards I cut from the deck, and definitely deserves a spot somewhere in the 99. They deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever an artifact enters the battlefield. The absurd amount of treasures you can make if one of your engines come online, such as Pyrohemia, would accelerate the game drastically if you had a Fireweaver in play. If asked to make space for it right now, I would consider cutting full throttle for it, honestly. Hedron Detonator was a late consideration. It deals damage much like Reckless Fireweaver whenever an artifact enters, but it only deals it to an opponent, not each opponent. It also does have the value, though, of sacrificing 2 artifacts to impulse draw the top card of your library. Moving on with our vein of dealing non-combat damage to players, if you did want to dive more into the artifacts ping my opponent's route, Virtue of Courage is an incredible source of card advantage. Its adventure side is a 2-mana shock, but its enchantment side impulse draws cards whenever an opponent is dealt non-combat damage. I considered it for my list, but ultimately the deck only had 7 ways to deal non-combat damage to an opponent, so it's only a win more card really. You could definitely revamp the deck slightly more towards a non-combat game plan with cards like Impact Tremors and the like, and this card would become an all-star in the deck very quickly. Finally, to round out our Maybe board, we have a couple of equipment, ranging from cute to useful and varying in terms of not referenced at all to canonical. Helm of the Host is one of my pet cards, allowing you to copy legends and give them haste. If you got this onto Sonic, you could speed away with the game at a breakneck pace. Unfortunately, it being a 4-drop competes with Sonic's mana value directly, and it does nothing immediately, which means that it had to get cut. Finally, Excalibur, Sword of Eden offered no real value in the Sonic deck. At best, it was a 0-drop artifact that can equip to Sonic for 2 mana, and he'll get blocked. A cute reference, but there were way better cuts to be made, and even now I'd bring in other cards from the Maybe board. And that's everything. A few important things, thank you for watching to the end. Take care of yourself, and most importantly, remember to tell the people you care about that you love them. Aside from those though, if you enjoyed the content, consider subscribing. I stream Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, playing Arena on Mondays, and a variety of other games on the other days. For example, I've been streaming through Rainworld recently, and I've been loving every minute of it. The Rainworld community is amazing, shout out to them. They also have made an 88-page document dedicated just to movement in the game, which is absurd. Beyond that, I also plan to get and play through Expedition 33 when I reach 500 subs, which is just around the corner. Thank you everybody who's subbed so far, I appreciate you guys so much. I also have a Discord where we talk about anything that's on the brain really, which is usually Magic, Monster Hunter, Nintendo, or various other card and video games. Consider dropping through if you want to chat and hang out. Aside from that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye! and remember to tell the people, wow. It being a 4-drop competes with Sonic's wow. The one wing. If you enjoyed the content, consider draw a card if it has flying.